After 37 years of dedicated service, I thought my retirement celebration would be the perfect ending to my career. I was wrong. What I got instead was a masterclass in betrayal, served up by the person I trusted most. But sometimes the best revenge comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the people who seem powerless hold all the cards. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and until 3 months ago, I was the Senior Operations Manager at Pinnacle Financial Services in downtown Chicago. 37 years with the same company, starting as a filing clerk fresh out of high school, and working my way up through sheer determination and an obsessive attention to detail that made me indispensable. I never married, never had children. My career was my life, and Pinnacle was my family. I'd seen 4 CEOs come and go, survived 3 major restructuring efforts, and helped the company grow from a small regional firm to a nationwide powerhouse with over 2,000 employees. During my tenure, I'd implemented the client management system that increased our efficiency by 40%. I designed the training protocols that reduced onboarding time from 6 months to 6 weeks. I'd personally mentored 63 junior employees, 22 of whom had gone on to management positions within the company. But more than my professional achievements, I was proud of the culture I'd helped build. Pinnacle wasn't just a workplace, it was a community. We celebrated birthdays, supported each other through personal crises, and maintained relationships that lasted decades. I knew the names of everyone's children, remembered their anniversaries, and made sure no one felt invisible or forgotten. My younger sister, Carmen, had joined Pinnacle 8 years ago as a marketing coordinator. I'd recommended her for the position after she'd struggled to find steady work following her divorce. Carmen was charming, creative, and had a natural talent for social media and client relations that quickly caught management's attention. I was genuinely proud of her success. Within 3 years, she'd been promoted to marketing manager, and 2 years after that, she became director of client engagement. She was making more money than she'd ever dreamed of, and for the first time since our father died when we were teenagers, our relationship felt balanced and supportive. Carmen lived in a beautiful townhouse in Lincoln Park, drove a brand new BMW, and had finally found her footing professionally. She credited me with giving her the opportunity that changed her life, and I loved seeing her flourish in an environment where I'd spent most of my adult years. Our mother, Rosa, lived in Phoenix now, enjoying her own retirement in a senior community where she played bridge and took watercolor classes. She'd worked 2 jobs to raise Carmen and me after Dad's death, and seeing both her daughters successful and stable was her greatest joy. We had a close relationship over the years. Carmen and I would fly to Phoenix together for holidays, and Mom would visit Chicago every summer. We had standing dinner plans every Thursday evening, and Carmen never missed sending flowers on the anniversary of Dad's death. I thought we were a team. The retirement celebration had been in planning for 6 months. I'd initially wanted something small, maybe a quiet dinner with my immediate department, but my colleagues had other ideas. They insisted on a company-wide event that would properly honor my decades of service. Carmen had volunteered to coordinate the planning committee, which seemed perfect. She knew the company culture, understood my preferences, and had the marketing expertise to create something memorable. I trusted her completely to handle the details while I focused on transitioning my responsibilities to my successor. The celebration was scheduled for Friday evening, September 15th, in the main conference center on the 20th floor of our building. We'd rented the entire space, which could accommodate 300 people. The invitation list included current employees, former colleagues who'd stayed in touch, several clients I'd worked with for decades, and even some of the executives from our parent company. Carmen had chosen an elegant evening of appreciation theme with navy blue and gold decorations that matched the company colors. She'd arranged for a catered dinner featuring my favorite foods, a string quartet for background music, and a presentation screen for the inevitable slideshow of memories from my career. I'd been looking forward to it for months. It represented not just the end of my working life, but a celebration of everything I'd built and contributed. I'd prepared a brief speech thanking my colleagues and sharing some thoughts about the importance of treating your workplace like a family. 3 weeks before the event, Carmen started acting strangely. She'd always been organized and communicative about planning details, but suddenly she became evasive when I asked questions about the menu or the program schedule. "Don't worry about it, Becca," she'd say with a dismissive wave. "Everything's under control. You just focus on enjoying your last few weeks at work." When I offered to help with final preparations, she insisted she had everything handled. When I asked to review the guest list or see the final invitation design, she told me it would ruin the surprise elements she'd planned. I chalked it up to her wanting to make the event special and didn't push. After all, Carmen had successfully managed dozens of client events and company functions. I had no reason to doubt her capabilities. Looking back, I should have paid attention to the other warning signs. My assistant, Jennifer, mentioned that Carmen had been asking unusual questions about my client relationships and project histories. She wanted to know which accounts you'd personally developed and which managers you'd hired directly, Jennifer told me. I thought it was for the presentation, but she seemed really focused on taking notes. My department head, Robert Chen, casually mentioned that Carmen had requested copies of my performance reviews and commendation letters from HR. "She said she wanted to include specific achievements in your tribute video," he explained. "It seemed like a thoughtful touch." Even my closest work friend, Patricia Williams from accounting, noticed something odd. "Carmen asked me about that time you saved the Morrison account when their previous manager left suddenly," she said. "She wanted all the details about how you stepped in and rebuilt their confidence in our company. I figured she was gathering stories for your speech, but she was taking notes like she was conducting an interview." The requests seemed reasonable on the surface. Of course, Carmen would need information about my career highlights for a proper celebration. Of course, she'd want specific examples of my contributions to include in presentations or speeches. But there was something in her tone, an intensity that felt different from simple event planning. When I mentioned this to our mother during one of our weekly phone calls, she dismissed my concerns. "Carmen just wants everything to be perfect for you, mija," Mom said. "She knows how much this company means to you, and she wants to make sure everyone understands what an incredible career you've had. Stop worrying and let your little sister take care of you for once." Maybe Mom was right. Maybe I was overthinking things because I was feeling emotional about leaving the company that had been my life for so long. Maybe Carmen's intensity was just her way of showing love and appreciation. 2 weeks before the celebration, I was called into an unexpected meeting with our HR director, Angela Thompson. Angela had been with Pinnacle for 12 years and had always been fair and professional in her dealings with everyone in the company. "Rebecca, I need to discuss something sensitive with you," she said, closing her office door behind us. "I've received some unusual requests regarding your retirement celebration, and I wanted to make sure you were aware of them." She explained that Carmen had requested access to my personnel file, including salary history, disciplinary records, and confidential performance evaluations. When Angela had explained that such information couldn't be shared for event planning purposes, Carmen had become argumentative. "She claimed you'd given her permission to access everything as your representative," Angela said carefully. "When I explained that we'd need your written authorization for that level of access, she seemed frustrated and asked if there were any negative incidents in your file that might come up during the celebration." The question sent a chill down my spine. Why would Carmen be concerned about negative incidents? In 37 years, I'd never had a serious disciplinary action, never been involved in any workplace conflicts that resulted in formal complaints. I told her that your record was exemplary and that there was nothing to worry about. But her response was strange. She seemed disappointed rather than relieved. Angela leaned forward, her expression serious. "Rebecca, I've been in HR long enough to recognize when someone is fishing for information they shouldn't have.
I wanted to make sure you knew about these requests because they felt inappropriate to me. I left Angela's office with a growing sense of unease. Why would Carmen need access to confidential information about my career? What could she possibly be planning that would require knowing about disciplinary records or salary details? That evening, I decided to have a direct conversation with my sister. I drove to her townhouse after work, bringing Chinese takeout from our favorite restaurant as a peace offering in case I was about to create unnecessary drama. Carmen seemed genuinely happy to see me, which made me feel foolish for being suspicious. We ate dinner and chatted about work, Mom's latest watercolor project, and the final details for the retirement celebration. Finally, I brought up my conversation with Angela. HR mentioned you had requested access to my personnel file. Is there something specific you need for event planning? Carmen's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. For just a moment, I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before when she looked at me. Something calculating and cold.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Angela's being overly cautious, Carmen said, with a laugh that sounded forced. I just wanted to make sure I had accurate information about your salary progression and major achievements. You know how corporate presentations are. They want specific numbers and dates. But why would you need salary information for a retirement celebration? To show the progression of your career, she replied quickly. How you started as a filing clerk and worked your way up to senior management. It's an inspirational story, Becca. People love to hear about that kind of success. Her explanation made sense, but something about her delivery felt rehearsed. And it didn't explain why she'd asked about negative incidents or disciplinary records. What about asking whether there were any problems in my file? I pressed gently. Carmen's pause lasted a beat too long. I wanted to make sure there weren't any surprises. You know how these corporate events can go? Sometimes people bring up old conflicts or disagreements. I just wanted to be prepared in case anyone tried to create drama during your celebration. Again, the explanation was reasonable, but combined with Angela's concerns and the secretive way Carmen had been handling the planning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to let it go for the evening, but I made a mental note to pay closer attention to Carmen's behavior over the next 2 weeks. What I discovered during those final weeks before my retirement celebration would change everything I thought I knew about my sister, my career, and the true nature of family loyalty. The day of my retirement celebration started perfectly. I woke up early, treated myself to a manicure at my favorite salon, and spent the afternoon at home preparing for what I expected to be one of the most meaningful evenings of my life. I chose a navy blue dress that complemented the event colors Carmen had selected, paired it with the pearl necklace our father had given me for my college graduation, and felt genuinely excited for the first time in weeks. Whatever concerns I'd had about Carmen's behavior seemed trivial compared to the significance of celebrating 37 years of professional achievement. Jennifer had left early to help with final setup, and Robert had taken the afternoon off to attend with his wife. The entire 20th floor of our building had been transformed into an elegant celebration space, and I'd received dozens of well wishes from colleagues throughout the week. At 5:30, I arrived at the office building and took the elevator to the conference center. The doors opened to reveal a beautifully decorated space filled with familiar faces, soft lighting, and the gentle sounds of classical music. Carmen had outdone herself with the arrangements. Round tables covered in crisp white linens were scattered throughout the room, each centerpiece featuring navy and gold flowers that perfectly matched the company branding. A registration table near the entrance displayed an elegant welcome sign with my name in gold calligraphy, and servers circulated with champagne and appetizers. I spotted my mother near the windows, looking radiant in a burgundy dress I'd helped her pick out during her last visit. She was chatting animatedly with Patricia and Robert, her face glowing with pride. Seeing her there, surrounded by people who'd been part of my professional family for decades, made my throat tight with emotion.
Carmen appeared at my side almost immediately, looking stunning in a black cocktail dress that showed off her recent weight loss. She air-kissed my cheek and guided me through the crowd, introducing me to guests as if I were a visiting dignitary rather than someone who'd worked alongside these people for years. "Everyone's so excited to celebrate with you tonight," she said, her smile bright and genuine. "I think we've really created something special here." For the first hour, everything felt perfect. I mingled with colleagues, shared memories with former employees who'd driven in from surrounding suburbs, and posed for countless photos with the executive team. The catering was exceptional, featuring salmon with lemon herb sauce and roasted vegetables prepared exactly the way I preferred. Angela Thompson approached me during cocktail hour, looking elegant in a charcoal gray pantsuit. "Rebecca, this is a beautiful celebration," she said warmly. "Carmen has done an incredible job with the planning." "She really has," I agreed, feeling guilty about my earlier suspicions. "I was worried about nothing." Angela's smile faltered slightly. "Actually, I wanted to mention something to you. Carmen submitted some last-minute changes to tonight's program that I found unusual. She didn't discuss them with you first?" Before I could respond, the lights dimmed and Carmen appeared at the front of the room, tapping a wine glass with a silver spoon to get everyone's attention. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the space. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate my sister Rebecca's remarkable career at Pinnacle Financial Services."
Applause filled the room as I made my way to the front, expecting to be called up for the traditional speeches and presentations. But Carmen held up her hand, indicating I should remain where I was. Before we hear from Rebecca herself, I wanted to share some thoughts about what it really means to build a successful career, Carmen continued. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating achievements, it's about understanding the full picture of how those achievements were earned." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. This wasn't the warm, appreciative speech I'd expected. There was an edge to her words that felt more like a lecture than a tribute. "My sister has indeed spent 37 years at this company," Carmen said, her smile never wavering. "And during that time, she's learned some valuable lessons about the importance of strategic positioning, careful networking, and knowing exactly how to present yourself to the right people at the right time." The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. I could see confused expressions on the faces of my colleagues who'd expected a straightforward celebration of my contributions and achievements. "For example," Carmen continued, clicking a remote that activated the presentation screen behind her, "let's talk about the Morrison account that Rebecca is often credited with saving." A slide appeared showing the Morrison client file, including confidential information about contract values and profit margins that should never have been displayed publicly. My heart began racing as I realized Carmen had somehow accessed restricted company data. "What many people don't know," she said, her voice taking on a lecturing tone, "is that Rebecca only became involved with Morrison after their previous account manager, David Walsh, was terminated for reasons that were never made public." Another slide appeared, this one showing David's termination letter with details about a sexual harassment complaint that had been filed against him. The information was completely confidential, and displaying it violated numerous company policies regarding employee privacy. "Rebecca stepped in during a crisis situation," Carmen continued, "but the real hero of that story was Sarah Mitchell from our legal department, who spent months rebuilding client confidence after David's inappropriate behavior nearly cost us $1 million account." I looked around the room in shock. Sarah was sitting at a table near the back, her face flushed with embarrassment at being dragged into Carmen's presentation. David's termination had been handled discreetly to protect all parties involved, and his personal struggles with addiction and resulting poor judgment had never been part of any public discussion. "Similarly," Carmen said, advancing to the next slide, "Rebecca's famous efficiency improvements in client management weren't entirely her own innovation."
This slide showed email exchanges between me and various department heads, but they'd been edited to remove context and make it appear as though I'd taken credit for other people's ideas. The selective editing made my collaborative leadership style look manipulative and self-serving. These emails show how Rebecca systematically gathered suggestions from junior employees and implemented them under her own name, Carmen explained. While teamwork is certainly valuable, it's important to recognize the original contributors to these innovations. The room was dead silent now. I could see shock and confusion on every face, including my mother's. Rosa looked devastated, her hand pressed to her chest as she stared at the screen displaying what appeared to be evidence of my professional dishonesty. But the worst was yet to come. Most importantly, Carmen said, her voice growing stronger and more confident, I think it's time we addressed the elephant in the room regarding Rebecca's relationship with senior management and how that relationship may have influenced her career advancement. The next slide showed a photo of me having lunch with our former CEO, Marcus Henderson, taken 3 years ago during a routine business meeting about budget planning. But Carmen had cropped the image to remove other meeting participants and added a caption suggesting the lunch was a personal rather than professional encounter. Rebecca has always been strategic about her relationships with male executives. While there's nothing inherently wrong with networking, it's worth noting that her promotions often coincided with particularly close working relationships with decision makers. The implication was clear and devastating. Carmen was suggesting that my career advancement had been based on inappropriate personal relationships rather than professional merit. She was essentially accusing me of sleeping my way to the top in front of 300 colleagues, clients, and friends. I tried to speak, to interrupt this character assassination masquerading as a retirement tribute, but my voice seemed to have disappeared entirely. I felt paralyzed watching my professional reputation being systematically destroyed by someone I'd trusted completely. Now, I want to be clear, Carmen said, her tone becoming artificially conciliatory. I'm not suggesting that Rebecca hasn't worked hard or contributed to this company's success. I'm simply providing context that I believe is important for understanding the complete picture of her career trajectory. She clicked to a final slide showing my salary progression over 37 years, information that was strictly confidential and should never have been displayed publicly.
As you can see, Rebecca's compensation has increased substantially over the years, often exceeding industry standards for similar positions. While she's certainly earned recognition for her contributions, it's worth considering whether these rewards were always proportional to her actual responsibilities and achievements. The presentation ended with polite but scattered applause from audience members who seemed unsure how to respond to what they'd just witnessed. Some people looked confused, others appeared uncomfortable, and a few seemed to be reevaluating everything they thought they knew about my career. Carmen returned to the podium with the same bright smile she'd worn throughout her devastating presentation. And now, she said cheerfully, let's hear from Rebecca herself about her 37 wonderful years at Pinnacle Financial Services. She gestured for me to approach the microphone, still smiling, as if she just delivered a heartwarming tribute instead of a calculated assassination of my professional character. I walked toward the front of the room on unsteady legs, feeling the weight of 300 pairs of eyes studying me with new suspicion. These were people who'd worked with me for decades, who'd celebrated my achievements and trusted my judgment. Now they were looking at me like they were seeing a stranger. As I reached for the microphone, I caught sight of Angela Thompson's face. The HR director looked absolutely furious, her jaw clenched and her eyes fixed on Carmen with an expression of barely controlled rage.
I realized at that moment that whatever Carmen had done to obtain confidential personnel information and client data, she'd likely violated numerous laws and company policies in the process. But the damage was already done. My reputation lay in ruins, my relationships with colleagues were irreparably damaged, and my retirement celebration had become a public humiliation orchestrated by the person I'd loved and trusted most. I had two choices. I could defend myself and try to explain the context behind Carmen's carefully edited presentation, or I could find a way to turn this disaster into something else entirely. What I chose to do next would determine not just how this evening ended, but how the rest of my life would begin. Standing at that microphone, looking out at 300 faces that had shifted from celebration to suspicion, I felt something crystallize inside me. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold clarity I'd never experienced before. I glanced at Carmen, who was watching me with barely concealed satisfaction, expecting me to stumble through some defensive explanation or tearful denial. She thought she'd cornered me, destroyed my reputation so thoroughly that I'd have no choice but to accept humiliation as the final chapter of my career. She was wrong. "Thank you, Carmen, for that comprehensive presentation," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You've certainly given everyone a lot to think about." I turned to face the audience, making eye contact with familiar faces throughout the room. These people had worked with me for years, some for decades. They knew who I really was, regardless of what selective editing and manipulated context might suggest. "Carmen is absolutely right about one thing," I continued. "Tonight should be about understanding the complete picture, so let me share some context that might help clarify a few points." I could see Carmen's confident expression faltering slightly. This wasn't the response she anticipated. First, regarding the Morrison account. Yes, I did step in after David Walsh's termination, and yes, Sarah Mitchell's legal expertise was crucial to rebuilding client confidence. But what Carmen's presentation didn't mention is that I volunteered to take on Morrison during my vacation time, working 16-hour days for 3 weeks without additional compensation, because I knew losing that client would mean layoffs in Sarah's department. I paused, letting that information sink in. Several people in the audience nodded, remembering the crisis period Carmen had referenced. As for the efficiency improvements in client management, those emails Carmen showed were from collaborative brainstorming sessions where I specifically asked for input from every level of our organization. The final implementations included detailed credits to all contributors, which you'll find in the official project documentation that Carmen apparently chose not to include in her presentation. I was gaining momentum now, my voice growing stronger with each word. The audience was listening intently, their expressions shifting from suspicion back to something resembling their usual respect. And regarding my lunch with Marcus Henderson, that photo was taken during a budget meeting that included 6 department heads discussing the pension plan restructuring that saved this company $12 million and protected the retirement benefits of every person in this room.
I looked directly at Carmen, whose face had gone pale. "I'm curious how you obtained confidential personnel files, client data, and salary information to create tonight's presentation. That material is protected by both company policy and federal privacy laws." The room fell completely silent. Angela Thompson was nodding slowly, her expression grim. I could see other executives exchanging concerned glances as they began to understand the implications of what Carmen had done. "But you know what?" I said, turning back to the audience with a smile. "I'm actually grateful for tonight, because Carmen has inadvertently given me the perfect opportunity to make an announcement I've been considering for several weeks." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded document I'd been carrying since my conversation with Angela 2 weeks earlier.
3 weeks ago, our HR director brought some concerning questions to my attention regarding unauthorized access to confidential company information. Those questions prompted me to conduct my own investigation into potential security breaches and policy violations within our organization. Carmen's face was now visibly panicked. She started to speak, but I held up my hand. During that investigation, I discovered a pattern of concerning behavior that I felt obligated to report to the appropriate authorities. Tonight's presentation has provided additional evidence that confirms my initial findings. I unfolded the document, which was a formal complaint I'd filed with the Department of Labor regarding misuse of confidential employee information. Effective immediately, I'm withdrawing my retirement and requesting an extended leave of absence to assist with a federal investigation into privacy violations and potential identity theft involving current Pinnacle employees. The gasps from the audience were audible. Carmen looked like she might faint, gripping the edge of a nearby table for support. I want to be clear that this investigation doesn't reflect on Pinnacle Financial Services as an organization, I continued. Our company has excellent policies protecting employee privacy and confidential information. The issue is with individuals who have chosen to violate those policies for personal gain. I folded the document and placed it back in my purse. So while I appreciate everyone coming tonight to celebrate what we thought was my retirement, it appears my career at Pinnacle isn't quite finished yet. I stepped away from the microphone and walked directly to Angela Thompson's table. Angela, could we schedule a meeting first thing Monday morning? I have additional documentation I'd like to share with you and the executive team. Angela stood up, her professional composure firmly in place. Absolutely, Rebecca. I'll also be contacting our legal department to ensure we're handling the situation appropriately. As I turned to leave the podium area, my mother approached me with tears in her eyes. But they weren't tears of disappointment or confusion. They were tears of pride. Mija, she said softly, taking my hands in hers, I should have known better than to doubt you, even for a moment. Your father would be so proud of how you handled that. The room began buzzing with conversations as people processed what had just transpired. I could see small groups forming, colleagues who'd worked with me for years reassuring each other that the presentation they'd witnessed didn't align with their personal experiences of my character and professionalism. Patricia Williams approached me next, her expression furious. Rebecca, I am so sorry about what just happened. That was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. Thank you, Patricia. Your support means everything to me. I want you to know that half the accounting department is ready to provide statements about your integrity and work ethic if this goes to any kind of formal review. Similar offers of support came from other colleagues throughout the evening. Robert Chen pulled me aside to express his outrage at Carmen's presentation and his willingness to testify about my collaborative leadership style. Jennifer was practically in tears, apologizing for not recognizing the warning signs when Carmen had been asking unusual questions about my work history. But the most significant conversation came from an unexpected source. Marcus Henderson, our former CEO who'd been featured in Carmen's manipulated presentation, had been sitting at the VIP table throughout the evening. He approached me as I was preparing to leave. Rebecca, he said, his voice grave, I need you to know that what happened tonight was completely unacceptable. That photograph was taken during a legitimate business meeting, and the implication your sister made was defamatory. I appreciate you saying that, Marcus.
I'm not just saying it, I'm documenting it. I'll be providing a sworn statement to HR and to your attorney if necessary. What Carmen did tonight could constitute slander, and I won't allow my presence in a business photograph to be used to damage your reputation. As the evening wound down, I realized that Carmen's attempt to destroy my credibility had actually backfired spectacularly. Instead of damaging my relationships with colleagues, she'd galvanized their support and exposed herself as someone willing to violate laws and company policies for personal reasons. Carmen herself had disappeared shortly after my response to her presentation. I later learned from Patricia that she had been seen leaving through the emergency stairwell, avoiding the main elevators where she might encounter other guests. The irony wasn't lost on me. And trying to paint me as someone who'd advanced through manipulation and strategic relationships, Carmen had demonstrated
actual manipulation while simultaneously strengthening the genuine relationships I'd built over nearly 4 decades. But I wasn't finished yet. As I drove home that night, I was already planning my next moves. Carmen had opened a door she couldn't close, and I intended to walk through it with everything I had learned about strategic thinking during my years in corporate management. The game she'd started was far from over, and she was about to discover that 37 years of professional experience had taught me a few things about playing the long game. I spent the weekend documenting every detail I could remember about Carmen's unauthorized access to confidential information. I compiled a timeline of her suspicious behavior, gathered evidence of policy violations, and prepared a comprehensive report that would leave no doubt about the seriousness of her actions. Monday morning, I arrived at Angela Thompson's office with 3 file folders, a digital recorder, and a strategy that would ensure Carmen never had the opportunity to sabotage anyone else's career. What I discovered during that meeting would prove that Carmen's betrayal was even more calculated and extensive than I had initially realized, and it would provide me with everything I needed to turn her victory into a devastating defeat. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I prepared for what I knew would be the most important meeting of my career. I dressed carefully in my sharpest business suit, charcoal gray with a burgundy blouse that conveyed both professionalism and confidence. Today wasn't about retiring gracefully. It was about protecting everything I'd built and ensuring justice was served. Angela Thompson's office was located on the 15th floor, away from the main departmental areas where most employees worked. I arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase that contained enough documentation to end Carmen's career permanently. "Good morning, Rebecca," Angela said, her expression serious, as she gestured for me to take a seat at the small conference table in her office. "Before we begin, I want you to know that I've already initiated a preliminary investigation into Friday night's events. What happened at your celebration was completely unacceptable." I opened my briefcase and arranged 3 thick folders on the table. "I appreciate that, Angela. I've spent the weekend compiling additional evidence that I think you'll find very concerning." Over the next 2 hours, I walked Angela through a comprehensive timeline of Carmen's suspicious behavior, starting with her usual questions about my client relationship 6 weeks earlier and culminating in Friday's devastating presentation. The first folder contained printed emails showing Carmen's communications with various department heads, where she had systematically gathered confidential information under the guise of planning my retirement celebration. What made these emails particularly damning was how her requests had evolved from reasonable event planning inquiries to specific demands for sensitive data that had no legitimate connection to organizing a company party. "Look at this email chain with Robert Chen," I said, pointing to a series of messages from 3 weeks earlier. Carmen initially asked for a list of my major project achievements, which would be appropriate for a tribute presentation. But then she specifically requested copies of my performance evaluations, salary reviews, and any documented conflicts with other employees. These emails clearly violate our confidentiality policies. Department heads aren't authorized to share personnel information with family members, regardless of the stated purpose. The second folder was even more damning. It contained evidence that Carmen had used her position in the marketing department to access client files and financial records that were completely outside her authorization level. Carmen used her administrative credentials to pull the Morrison account files 2 weeks ago, I explained, showing Angela the digital access logs I'd obtained via IT. She also accessed David Walsh's termination records, which are classified as confidential HR documents. No one, outside of HR and senior management, should have been able to view that information. Angela's expression had shifted from concern to outright alarm. "How did you obtain these access logs?" "I requested them directly from IT as part of my own investigation into potential security breaches. As a senior manager, I have the authority to review access patterns for any files I've worked on personally. What I discovered was a systematic pattern of unauthorized access spanning several weeks." But the third folder contained the most explosive evidence of all. During my weekend investigation, I'd uncovered something that transformed Carmen's betrayal from a personal attack into a potentially criminal enterprise. Angela, I need to show you something that goes far beyond Friday night's presentation, I said, opening the final folder with hands that were steadier than I felt inside. Carmen hasn't just been accessing confidential information for the purpose of embarrassing me. She's been stealing proprietary client data for her own financial gain. I spread out printed records showing Carmen's recent freelance marketing consulting activities, which she'd failed to disclose to Pinnacle despite company policies requiring approval for outside business activities. 3 months ago, Carmen established a consulting firm called Strategic Client Solutions, I continued. She's been using confidential information about our clients' marketing budgets, campaign strategies, and competitive analysis to offer services to companies in direct competition with Pinnacle's business. Angela leaned forward, studying the documentation with intense focus. Are you saying she's been selling our clients' proprietary information to their competitors? That's exactly what I'm saying. Look at this contract she signed with Meridian Financial Group last month. They're offering marketing services to 3 companies that are currently bidding against our clients for major municipal contracts. The strategies Carmen is providing them are based directly on confidential information from our client files. The implications were staggering. Carmen hadn't just violated company policies or professional ethics. She'd engaged in industrial espionage that could result in federal charges and massive financial liability for Pinnacle. There's more, I said, pulling out additional documents. Carmen has been using her access to our client database to identify businesses that are dissatisfied with their current marketing providers. She then approaches them directly using information from our confidential client satisfaction surveys to position herself as the solution to problems she learned about through her employment here. Angela was frantically taking notes, her face pale with the realization of how serious the situation had become. Rebecca, if what you're telling me is accurate, we're looking at potential criminal charges for theft of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty, and possibly fraud. I've already contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division, I said quietly. They're opening a formal investigation, and they've requested that Pinnacle preserve all digital records related to Carmen's employment and system access. The room fell silent as Angela processed the magnitude of what I'd uncovered. What had started as a family conflict over a retirement celebration had revealed a sophisticated scheme of corporate espionage and theft. "How long have you known about this?" Angela asked. "I suspected something was wrong 3 weeks ago when you told me about Carmen's inappropriate requests for personnel information, but I didn't discover the extent of her activities until I started documenting everything for today's meeting. The consulting business, the competitive intelligence, the systematic theft of client data, it all became clear when I started connecting the timeline of her suspicious behavior." Angela stood up and walked to her window, staring out at the Chicago skyline as she gathered her thoughts. "Rebecca, I need to ask you directly, is there any possibility that you were aware of Carmen's outside consulting activities before this weekend?" "Absolutely not. I had no knowledge of Strategic Client Solutions or any of her unauthorized business activities. If I had known, I would have reported it immediately." "And your decision to withdraw your retirement and request a leave of absence, was that planned before Friday night?" I shook my head. Friday night changed everything. I'd been considering delaying my retirement because I felt like there were loose ends to tie up, but Carmen's presentation and the way she obtained confidential information made me realize that something much more serious was happening. Angela returned to her seat and picked up her phone. "I need to brief our CEO and legal counsel immediately. This situation requires coordinated action across multiple departments and will need to ensure full cooperation with the federal investigation." As she made her calls, I sat quietly, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. I'd uncovered evidence that would likely result in Carmen facing criminal charges and civil liability that could destroy her financially. But she was still my sister, and the betrayal cut deeper than any professional conflict could. 20 minutes later, Angela finished her calls and turned back to me with a grim expression. Rebecca, I've spoken with our CEO and the head of our legal department. They want to meet with you this afternoon to discuss the full scope of your findings. They've also authorized me to place Carmen on immediate administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Has anyone contacted her yet?
Security is retrieving her access credentials and company equipment as we speak. She's being escorted from the building and will be informed that any attempt to access Pinnacle systems or contact current employees could result in additional charges. I felt a knot form in my stomach despite my determination to see justice done. What happens next? The FBI will likely want to interview you within the next few days. Our legal team will be coordinating with federal prosecutors to ensure full cooperation with their investigation. And you'll need to prepare for the possibility that this case could take months or even years to resolve fully. Rebecca, I want you to know that I'm personally grateful you uncovered this situation. Carmen's activities could have resulted in massive financial losses for our clients and potentially destroyed Pinnacle's reputation in the marketplace. I just did what anyone in my position should have done. No, you did what someone with exceptional integrity and investigative skills would do. Most people would have been too personally involved to think clearly about the broader implications. As I gathered my folders and prepared to leave, Angela made one final comment that would prove prophetic. Rebecca, I have a feeling that Carmen's betrayal on Friday night is going to turn out to be the biggest mistake of her life. But for you, it might end up being the beginning of something much more significant than retirement. I left Angela's office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Carmen had intended to destroy my reputation and force me into a humiliated retirement. Instead, she'd provided me with the opportunity to demonstrate exactly why I'd been so successful during my decades at Pinnacle. But as I returned to my office to prepare for the afternoon meeting with senior management, I had no idea that the investigation would uncover connections and conspiracies that went far beyond Carmen's individual crimes. The web of deception she'd created was about to unravel completely, and when it did, it would expose corruption that reached into the highest levels of Pinnacle's organizational structure. The afternoon meeting in the executive boardroom felt like stepping into the epicenter of a corporate earthquake. I'd been in this room countless times over the years for budget presentations and strategic planning sessions, but never as the whistleblower in a federal investigation that threatened to unravel the very fabric of Pinnacle Financial Services. CEO Jonathan Hartwell sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, flanked by General Counsel Patricia Morrison and Chief Operating Officer Michael Chen. Angela Thompson occupied the chair to my right, her laptop open and recording device clearly visible on the polished surface between us. Rebecca, Hartwell began, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years leading major corporations. Angela has briefed us on your preliminary findings regarding Carmen's activities. Before we proceed with the federal investigation, I need you to walk us through exactly how you uncovered this information and what additional evidence you may have discovered. I opened my briefcase for the second time that day, but the documents I spread across the conference table now told a story that was far more complex and disturbing than even I had initially realized. During my weekend investigation, I discovered that Carmen's consulting activities began much earlier than I initially reported. Strategic Client Solutions was established 8 months ago, not 3 months, as I told Angela this morning. Patricia Morrison leaned forward, her pen poised over a legal pad. What changed your assessment? I accessed our digital archives using my administrative privileges and traced Carmen's system activity back to the beginning of this year. What I found was a pattern of data extraction that coincides perfectly with major client presentations and contract negotiations. In January, Carmen accessed the Midwest manufacturing account files 3 days before they were scheduled to present their expansion proposal to the Chicago Transit Authority. That same week, Meridian Financial Group, one of Carmen's consulting clients, submitted a competing proposal that addressed specific concerns Midwest had identified in their internal planning documents.
Michael Chen studied the timeline with growing alarm. Are you saying Carmen's activities may have cost us existing client relationships? I'm saying Carmen's activities have cost us approximately $2.8 million in lost contracts over the past 8 months. I pulled out detailed financial projections I'd calculated using our standard commission and revenue models. The room fell dead silent. Hartwell's face had gone pale, and Patricia Morrison was frantically scribbling notes about potential civil liability and damages.
There's something else, I continued, reaching for a folder I'd labeled Internal Connections. Carmen didn't develop the scheme independently. She had help from someone with access to information that even her marketing department credentials couldn't have provided. I placed a series of bank records on the table, documents I'd obtained through a private investigator I'd hired over the weekend using my personal savings. Strategic Client Solutions has received payments totaling $450,000 over the past 8 months. But Carmen's consulting contracts only account for about 60% of that income. The remaining 40% came from a shell company called Executive Advisory Partners. Angela Thompson's eyes widened as she recognized the implications. Someone else inside Pinnacle has been feeding information to Carmen's consulting business. Not just someone, I said, pulling out the most damning piece of evidence I'd uncovered. Executive Advisory Partners is owned by Thomas Brennan, our Vice President of Strategic Development. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Thomas Brennan had been with Pinnacle for 15 years, had access to the highest levels of confidential information, and was responsible for competitive analysis and market intelligence across all of our major client relationships. Hartwell found his voice first. Thomas has been selling proprietary information to Carmen's consulting firm? Thomas has been selling proprietary information, client strategies, and competitive intelligence to multiple consulting firms, I corrected. Carmen's business was just one of several shell companies receiving confidential data from Executive Advisory Partners. I spread out additional bank records showing payments from Executive Advisory Partners to 6 different consulting firms, all of which had subsequently won contracts away from Pinnacle clients, or had advised competitors in bidding situations where our clients had been unsuccessful. The total financial impact extends far beyond the $2.8 million I calculated for Carmen's activities alone. Based on the pattern of competitive losses correlating with Thomas's information sales, I estimate Pinnacle has lost between $12 and $15 million in revenue over the past 2 years. Patricia Morrison was now writing so rapidly that her pen was practically smoking. Rebecca, how did you obtain these financial records? We need to ensure any evidence we provide to federal investigators was gathered legally. I hired a private investigator licensed in Illinois who specializes in corporate fraud cases. All of these records were obtained through legitimate channels, public business filings, financial disclosure databases, and standard background investigation procedures. Michael Chen leaned back in his chair, his face reflecting the same shock I'd first felt when I discovered the scope of the conspiracy. This isn't just employee misconduct. This is organized corporate espionage involving millions of dollars in damages. It gets worse, I said, opening my final folder. Carmen and Thomas weren't just selling information to random competitors. They were specifically targeting our most vulnerable client relationships and our most lucrative potential contracts. I pulled out a document that had made my blood run cold when I'd first read it. A detailed strategic plan outlining how to systematically weaken Pinnacle's market position by providing competitors with inside information about our client retention strategies, pricing models, and expansion plans. This document was found in Carmen's personal email account, which the private investigator accessed through a data recovery service after she attempted to delete her email history this weekend. It's a comprehensive plan to transfer Pinnacle's most valuable clients to competitors over a 3-year period. Hartwell stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he processed the implications of what I'd uncovered. The plan specifically identifies 23 of our largest clients as transfer targets.
For each client, it outlines their specific vulnerabilities, their dissatisfaction points with our current service, and the exact competitive advantages that rival firms would need to successfully poach their business. Angela Thompson was scrolling through her laptop, cross-referencing the client list with recent account activity. Jonathan, 12 of these 23 clients have already requested proposals from competitors in the past 6 months. 3 of them have given formal notice that they're reviewing their service agreements with us. The magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. This wasn't just about Carmen's personal vendetta against me or even her individual criminal activities. It was a coordinated attack on the entire company that had employed us both, an attack that threatened the livelihoods of over 2,000 employees and the financial security of countless client companies that depended on our services. "There's one more thing you need to know," I said, pulling out a final document that I debated whether to reveal. Carmen's retirement celebration sabotage was motivated by personal jealousy or family dynamics. It was a calculated attempt to discredit me before I could expose the conspiracy.
I placed a printed email on the table, a communication between Carmen and Thomas from 3 weeks earlier, the same day Angela had first questioned Carmen about accessing confidential personnel files. Carmen knew I was getting suspicious about her activities, I explained. This email shows Thomas advising her to neutralize the Rebecca problem before I could piece together the full scope of their operation. The email was chilling in its casual discussion of destroying my reputation as a preemptive strike against potential whistleblowing. Patricia Morrison read the email twice before looking up with barely controlled anger. They planned to ruin your career to protect their criminal enterprise. The retirement celebration wasn't supposed to just embarrass me, I continued. Carmen hoped that publicly questioning my integrity and professionalism would make any future allegations I might make seem like the desperate accusations of someone whose reputation had already been destroyed. Hartwell returned to his seat, his expression grim but determined. "Rebecca, I need you to understand something. What you've uncovered here goes beyond anything we could have imagined when this started as a personnel issue this morning. This is a criminal conspiracy that has caused massive financial damage to our company and our clients." "I understand that, sir. More importantly," he continued, "your investigation has probably saved Pinnacle from bankruptcy. If this conspiracy had continued for another year or two, we might not have survived the competitive losses and the damage to our reputation." Angela Thompson nodded emphatically. "Rebecca, I've been in corporate HR for 20 years, and I've never seen anything approaching this level of systematic betrayal. The facts that you were able to uncover and document it so thoroughly is extraordinary." "What happens now?" I asked. Patricia Morrison answered first. "Now we turn everything over to the FBI and cooperate fully with their investigation. Thomas Brennan will be terminated immediately and his access revoked. All of the consulting firms that received information from executive advisory partners will be served with cease and desist orders and will be pursuing civil litigation to recover damages." "And Carmen?" I asked quietly. "Carmen will be facing federal charges for theft of trade secrets, wire fraud, money laundering, and potentially racketeering if the investigation determines that Strategic Client Solutions was part of an organized criminal enterprise," Patricia replied. "She's looking at potential prison time and financial liability that could extend into the millions of dollars." Hartwell leaned forward, his expression serious but respectful. "Rebecca, I want to offer you something, and I want you to consider it carefully before you answer." "What kind of offer?" "We want you to head up our new corporate security and compliance department. Your investigation skills, your knowledge of our systems and personnel, and your obviously uncompromising integrity make you the ideal person to ensure that nothing like this ever happens to Pinnacle Financial Services again." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You're offering me a promotion?" "I'm offering you the opportunity to reshape how this company protects itself and its clients," he corrected. "The position would come with a significant salary increase, a seat on our executive committee, and the authority to implement whatever security measures and oversight procedures you deem necessary." Angela Thompson smiled for the first time since our morning meeting. Rebecca, what started as your retirement celebration has turned into the most important career opportunity Pinnacle could possibly offer you. Michael Chen nodded enthusiastically. You've already proven that you have the skills and the moral courage to protect this company's interests, even when it means exposing people you care about personally. I looked around the table at faces that reflected genuine respect and admiration, emotions that were completely different from the suspicion and confusion I'd seen at Friday night's celebration. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Of course, Hartwell replied. Take all the time you need. But Rebecca, I want you to know that Pinnacle Financial Services owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. You didn't just uncover a criminal conspiracy, you saved this company. As I gathered my documents and prepared to leave the boardroom, I realized that Carmen's attempt to destroy my career had instead provided me with the opportunity for the most significant professional achievement of my life. But the story was far from over. The FBI investigation would take months, the legal proceedings could extend for years, and the full scope of the conspiracy was still being uncovered. What I didn't know yet was that my decision about Hartwell's offer would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just my own life, but the entire culture of corporate accountability within our industry. 3 days after the executive boardroom meeting, I was sitting in my office reviewing security protocols when Angela Thompson knocked on my door with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of anticipation and barely contained excitement. Rebecca, I need you to come with me to conference room C immediately, she said, her voice carrying an urgency that made me set down my files without question. What's happening? The FBI agents are here and they want to speak with you before they interview Carmen. But there's something else, something we discovered this morning that changes everything about this case. As we walked down the hallway toward the conference room, Angela filled me in on developments that had unfolded while I'd been considering Hartwell's job offer. The private investigator you hired continued his research after Monday's meeting, she explained. What he found yesterday prompted the FBI to expedite their investigation and coordinate with the Securities and Exchange Commission for a much broader inquiry. Broader how? Rebecca, this conspiracy doesn't just involve Thomas Brennan and Carmen. It extends to senior executives at 3 of our major competitors and potentially to board members at 2 of our biggest client companies. We stopped outside conference room C, where I could see through the glass partition that several people in dark suits were setting up recording equipment and organizing stacks of documents. The FBI believes we've uncovered evidence of a market manipulation scheme that's been operating for at least 5 years. Carmen and Thomas weren't just selling information to competitors. They were part of a coordinated effort to artificially inflate contract values and manipulate bidding processes across the entire financial services industry. I felt my legs go weak. Are you saying this is bigger than corporate espionage? I'm saying this might be the largest white-collar crime investigation in Chicago's history, and you're the key witness who made it all possible. Inside the conference room, I was introduced to Special Agent Diana Rodriguez from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division and Assistant U.S. Attorney James Patterson, who would be prosecuting the case. Their credentials and the sheer number of federal agents present made it clear that this investigation had grown far beyond anything I could have imagined. Ms. Martinez, Agent Rodriguez began, we want to thank you for the exceptional quality of evidence you have provided. Your documentation and analysis have allowed us to piece together a conspiracy that we've been investigating peripherally for over 2 years without making significant progress. I'm glad I could help, but I'm still not sure I understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Assistant U.S. Attorney Patterson opened a thick folder and spread out a chart that looked like something from an organized crime investigation. What we're dealing with is a sophisticated bid rigging and market manipulation scheme involving senior executives from 7 major financial services firms, including Pinnacle. The chart showed connections between companies I recognized as major players in our industry, linked by arrows indicating money transfers, information exchanges, and coordinated bidding activities.
Your sister Carmen and Thomas Brennan were operating at the ground level of this conspiracy, but the investigation has revealed that they were taking direction from executives at competing firms who were coordinating their activities to ensure that contracts were awarded based on inside information rather than competitive merit. Patterson pointed to specific sections of the chart. Meridian Financial Group, Davidson and Associates, and Premier Consulting Services have been working together to manipulate contract awards for municipal bonds, corporate restructuring projects, and pension fund management services worth over $200 million. I stared at the chart, trying to process the implications. So, Carmen wasn't just stealing information for her own consulting business? Carmen was a paid operative in a larger scheme, Rodriguez confirmed. Her consulting business was essentially a front operation designed to provide plausible cover for receiving stolen information and coordinating competitive responses. The retirement celebration sabotage makes even more sense now, Patterson added. When the conspiracy leaders learned that you were getting suspicious about Carmen's activities, they ordered her to neutralize you as a potential threat to the entire operation. Angela Thompson leaned forward with obvious anger. They were willing to destroy Rebecca's reputation and career just to protect their criminal enterprise.
Actually, it's worse than that, Rodriguez said grimly. Based on communications we've recovered from encrypted phones used by the conspiracy leadership, they were prepared to go much further than character assassination, if necessary. The room fell silent as the implications of that statement sank in. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized how dangerous the situation had become. Are you saying I was in physical danger? We're saying that white-collar criminals operating at this level often escalate their methods when they feel cornered, Patterson replied carefully. The conspiracy leaders had invested too much money and taken too many risks to allow one person's suspicions to bring down the entire operation. Rodriguez pulled out a transcript of intercepted phone calls between Thomas Brennan and executives at the other firms involved in the conspiracy. These calls were recorded 3 days before your retirement celebration. Listen to this exchange between Thomas and Marcus Webb, the CEO of Meridian Financial Group. She pressed play on a digital recorder, and I heard Thomas's voice clearly. The Martinez woman is asking too many questions. Carmen thinks she might be putting together information about the consulting payments. A second voice, presumably Marcus Webb, responded, Then Carmen needs to handle the Martinez problem permanently. We can't afford to have someone with her access and credibility asking the wrong questions. Thomas's voice again. Carmen has a plan to discredit her at the retirement party. Public humiliation, destroy her professional reputation, make her look like a fraud. Good, but if that doesn't work, we may need to consider more direct solutions. This operation is too valuable to lose because one employee got suspicious. The recording ended, and I felt physically sick. My own sister had been willing to participate in a plan that could have escalated to physical threats against me. We have over 40 hours of similar recordings, Rodriguez continued. The conspiracy leaders were actively discussing contingency plans that included framing you for financial crimes, planting evidence of embezzlement in your personal accounts, and potentially arranging for you to have an accident if other methods failed. Angela Thompson reached over and squeezed my hand. Rebecca, you didn't just uncover corporate espionage. You exposed people who were willing to commit any crime necessary to protect their illegal profits. Patterson opened another folder containing what appeared to be financial records. The total scope of this conspiracy involves over $500 million in manipulated contracts, fraudulent bidding processes, and stolen proprietary information. Carmen's activities were just the tip of the iceberg. What happens now? I asked. Now we execute coordinated arrests across 7 states. Thomas Brennan is already in federal custody. Carmen will be arrested this afternoon when she reports to the FBI field office for what she thinks is a routine interview about her consulting business. Does she know about the larger conspiracy? Carmen knows she's in serious trouble for the information theft and consulting fraud, but she has no idea that we've uncovered the full scope of the operation, or that her co-conspirators were prepared to sacrifice her to protect themselves. Rodriguez leaned forward with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with genuine respect. Ms. Martinez, Carmen made a crucial mistake when she decided to target you specifically. Your position at Pinnacle, your analytical skills, and your access to information allowed you to uncover connections that we might never have discovered through traditional investigative methods. The irony is perfect, Angela said with a bitter smile. Carmen tried to destroy you to protect a criminal conspiracy, but her attack on you provided you with the motivation and opportunity to bring down the entire operation. Patterson opened another folder containing what appeared to be financial records. The total scope of this conspiracy involves over $500 million in manipulated contracts, fraudulent bidding processes, and stolen proprietary information. Carmen's activities were just the tip of the iceberg. What happens now? I asked. Now we execute coordinated arrests across 7 states. Thomas Brennan is already in federal custody. Carmen will be arrested this afternoon when she reports to the FBI field office for what she thinks is a routine interview about her consulting business. Does she know about the larger conspiracy? Carmen knows she's in serious trouble for the information theft and consulting fraud, but she has no idea that we've uncovered the full scope of the operation, or that her co-conspirators were prepared to sacrifice her to protect themselves. Rodriguez leaned forward with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with genuine respect. Ms. Martinez, Carmen made a crucial mistake when she decided to target you specifically. Your position at Pinnacle, your analytical skills, and your access to information allowed you to uncover connections that we might never have discovered through traditional investigative methods. The irony is perfect, Angela said with a bitter smile. Carmen tried to destroy you to protect a criminal conspiracy, but her attack on you provided you with the motivation and opportunity to bring down the entire operation. Patterson opened another folder containing what appeared to be financial records. The total scope of this conspiracy involves over $500 million in manipulated contracts, fraudulent bidding processes, and stolen proprietary information. Carmen's activities were just the tip of the iceberg. What happens now? I asked. We want to accept the position that Pinnacle offered you as head of corporate security and compliance. In that role, you'd have legitimate reasons to contact other firms in the industry, review security procedures, and investigate potential vulnerabilities in corporate information systems. You want me to be an undercover federal agent? We want you to be a corporate security executive who happens to be working with federal investigators. Everything you'd be doing would be completely legal and within the scope of your professional responsibilities. The offer was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. It would mean playing a role in bringing down a criminal conspiracy that had damaged not just Pinnacle, but the entire financial services industry. But it would also mean living with the knowledge that dangerous people might still consider me a threat.
How long would this assignment last? 6 to 12 months, Rodriguez replied, long enough to gather evidence against the remaining targets and ensure that we can prosecute this case successfully. Angela Thompson looked at me with obvious pride. Rebecca, this is an extraordinary opportunity to make sure that what happened to you and to Pinnacle never happens to anyone else in our industry. Before I could respond, there was a knock on the conference room door. A junior FBI agent entered and handed Rodriguez a note that made her smile broadly. Miss Martinez, I think you'll want to hear this. We just received word that Carmen attempted to destroy additional evidence this morning by deleting files from a personal cloud storage account. Our cybercrime unit was monitoring her activities and managed to recover everything before the deletion was complete. Patterson looked delighted. What did she delete?
financial records showing payments from the conspiracy totaling over $800,000, detailed instructions from Thomas Brennan about which Pinnacle information to steal, and, most importantly, recordings of phone calls between Carmen and Marcus Webb where they explicitly discussed plans to frame you for embezzlement if the retirement party sabotage didn't work. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with rage. Not only had Carmen betrayed me personally and professionally, but she'd been actively planning to destroy my life completely by framing me for crimes I'd never committed. The evidence Carmen tried to destroy this morning provides the final pieces we needed to charge the conspiracy leaders with racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud, Rodriguez continued. Her panic and attempt to cover up evidence has essentially guaranteed that everyone involved in this operation will face maximum federal penalties. As the meeting concluded, I realized that I was at a crossroads that would define the rest of my life. I could accept the federal assignment and help bring down a criminal conspiracy while building a new career in corporate security, or I could step away from the investigation, accept a quiet retirement, and try to rebuild my relationship with what remained of my family. But as I thought about Carmen's willingness to frame me for embezzlement and the conspiracy leaders' discussions of more direct solutions to the problem I represented, my decision became clear. Agent Rodriguez, I accept your offer, I said firmly. When do we start? The smile that spread across her face told me that I'd just committed to the most important and dangerous mission of my life. But I'd also committed to ensuring that justice would be served for every crime that had been committed against me, against Pinnacle, and against the integrity of an entire industry. Carmen's betrayal had started as a personal attack designed to humiliate me into quiet retirement. Instead, it had transformed me into a federal operative with the power to bring down a criminal empire that had stolen hundreds of millions of dollars and corrupted the fundamental principles of fair competition. The final confrontation was still ahead, but I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the agent of justice, and I was ready to finish what Carmen had started. 18 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse in downtown Chicago, watching as the final defendant in United States v. Webb et al. Was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The conspiracy that started with my sister's betrayal at a retirement party had become the largest financial fraud prosecution in Illinois history. Carmen had been among the first to be sentenced, receiving 8 years for her role in the conspiracy, plus 5 years of supervised release. The day of her sentencing, she'd finally broken down and apologized, not just for the retirement party sabotage, but for everything. The apology felt genuine, but it couldn't undo the damage she had caused or the relationships she'd destroyed. Thomas Brennan received 15 years, the harshest sentence of any Pinnacle employee involved in the scheme. Marcus Webb, the CEO of Meridian Financial Group, who discussed having me killed, was sentenced to 22 years and ordered to pay $47 million in restitution. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge addressed the broader impact of the case during the final sentencing hearing. This conspiracy represented a fundamental assault on the principles of fair competition that underpin our entire economic system, Judge Margaret Sullivan stated. However, it was ultimately exposed and defeated by the courage and integrity of a single individual who refused to allow personal betrayal to silence her commitment to justice. She was talking about me. My role as an undercover federal operative had lasted 14 months and resulted in the collection of evidence that secured convictions against 37 defendants across 7 states. Working within my official position as Director of Corporate Security and Compliance at Pinnacle, I'd been able to gather intelligence on industry practices that revealed corruption extending far beyond the original conspiracy.
The work had been dangerous at times. 3 months into the investigation, Marcus Webb's organization had attempted to bribe me with a $2 million consulting contract. When I reported the attempted bribe to the FBI, they'd used it as the basis for additional charges that extended Webb's sentence by 5 years. 6 months into the investigation, someone had broken into my apartment and searched through my personal files. The FBI determined it was likely an attempt to find evidence that I was working with federal investigators, but their security measures had protected my cover identity successfully. The most difficult moment had come 10 months into the investigation when my mother had called me crying about Carmen's arrest and begging me to help her daughter avoid prison time. "Mija, she made mistakes, but she's still your sister," Mom had pleaded. "Can't you talk to someone? Explain that she was just confused and got in with the wrong people." I'd had to explain to my mother that Carmen wasn't a victim of circumstances. She was a willing participant in a criminal enterprise that had stolen hundreds of millions of dollars and threatened the livelihoods of thousands of innocent employees across multiple companies. Carmen chose to betray me, Mom. She chose to steal from her employer. She chose to participate in a conspiracy that could have destroyed Pinnacle and cost 2,000 people their jobs. I can't fix the consequences of those choices. The conversation had been heartbreaking, but it had also been necessary. My mother needed to understand that family loyalty couldn't override justice, especially when that family member had been willing to see me framed for crimes I'd never committed. Now, as I walked out of the federal courthouse for the final time as a witness in this case, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that devastating evening 18 months ago. Pinnacle Financial Services had not only survived the scandal, but had emerged stronger than ever. The reforms I'd implemented as Director of Corporate Security and Compliance had become the industry standard, and we'd gained 12 major new clients who specifically chose Pinnacle because of our demonstrated commitment to ethical business practices. My department had grown from a one-person operation to a team of 8 specialists who monitored everything from cybersecurity to vendor relationships to employee communications. We'd prevented 3 separate attempts by competitors to recruit our employees for information-gathering purposes, and our security protocols had been adopted by firms across the financial services industry. More importantly, I'd found a professional purpose that was more fulfilling than anything I'd experienced during my previous 37 years at Pinnacle. Every day brought new challenges that required both analytical thinking and moral courage. And I was making a real difference in protecting not just my company, but the integrity of an entire industry. The personal recognition had been overwhelming. I'd been named Financial Executive of the Year by the Chicago Business Journal, had been invited to speak at conferences across the country about corporate security and whistleblower protection, and had been offered positions at consulting firms that would have tripled my already substantial salary. But I'd turned down all the external opportunities because I'd found something at Pinnacle that was more valuable than money or prestige. A sense of purpose that aligned perfectly with my values and abilities. 6 months earlier, Jonathan Hartwell had promoted me to Senior Vice President of Corporate Integrity, making me the youngest senior executive in Pinnacle's history and giving me oversight of all compliance, security, and ethical conduct programs across the company's 37 offices. The irony wasn't lost on me that Carmen's attempt to end my career had resulted in me achieving more professional success than I had ever imagined possible. The financial rewards had been substantial as well. The federal government had awarded me a whistleblower payment of $2.8 million under the Securities and Exchange Commission's whistleblower program, recognizing my role in exposing securities fraud and market manipulation. I'd used part of that money to establish the Rebecca Martinez Foundation for Corporate Ethics, which provided legal support and financial assistance to employees who exposed corporate wrongdoing. In just 1 year, the foundation had helped 17 whistleblowers navigate federal investigations and employment protection cases. But the most meaningful change in my life had been personal rather than professional. 3 months after the final sentencing, I'd received an unexpected letter from Carmen in federal prison. It wasn't another apology or an attempt to justify her actions.
Instead, it was a detailed confession of everything she'd done wrong and a commitment to make amends in whatever way possible once she was released. Rebecca, I know I can never undo the damage I caused or earn back your trust, but I want you to know that watching you turn my betrayal into something that protected thousands of innocent people has taught me more about integrity and courage than anything I've ever experienced. You showed me what real strength looks like, and I hope that someday I can find a way to honor the example you've set. The letter had made me cry for the first time since the night of my retirement celebration. Not tears of anger or sadness, but tears of hope that my sister might eventually find a way to rebuild her life based on genuine values rather than selfish ambition.
I'd written back, not offering forgiveness or reconciliation, but acknowledging her letter and expressing hope that she would use her time in prison to develop the character traits that could guide her toward a better future. My relationship with my mother had slowly healed as well. Rosa had initially been angry with me for not trying to help Carmen avoid prison, but over time she'd come to understand that my actions had protected not just Pinnacle, but the entire industry from ongoing criminal exploitation. "You did what your father would have done," she had told me during her last visit to Chicago. "You chose justice over comfort, truth over loyalty. I'm proud of the woman you've become, even though it was painful to watch." As I drove home from the courthouse on that final day of legal proceedings, I passed the building where my retirement celebration had taken place 18 months earlier. The banquet hall was hosting another corporate event, and I could see through the windows that it was decorated with the same elegant style that Carmen had chosen for my original celebration. For just a moment, I allowed myself to imagine how different my life would have been if Carmen had simply delivered a sincere tribute that night instead of orchestrating my public humiliation. I would have retired quietly, moved to a smaller apartment, and spent my golden years volunteering and traveling. Instead, I was driving home to my beautiful townhouse in Lincoln Park, ironically just 3 blocks from where Carmen used to live, to prepare for a conference call with federal prosecutors in New York who wanted my advice on investigating a similar conspiracy in the banking industry. At 55 years old, I'd found my true calling as a guardian of corporate integrity and a voice for employees who refused to stay silent when they witnessed wrongdoing. Carmen's betrayal had been meant to end my story with humiliation and defeat. Instead, it had given me the opportunity to write a completely new story about courage, justice, and the power of one person to make a difference when they refused to be silenced. The retirement celebration she had sabotaged had indeed marked the end of one phase of my life, but rather than ending with quiet obscurity, it launched me into the most meaningful and impactful years of my career. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing that could happen to you. Carmen had intended to destroy me, but she'd actually set me free to become the person I was always meant to be. And for that, despite everything she'd done, I was almost grateful. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.